Well, hello, everyone. My name is Erik Bush. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Demand-Driven Technologies, and I'll be presenting this webinar today on building supply chain agility from the focus of the sales and operations planning process. As you all should know, we've been running kind of an agility and resilience webinar series over the past several weeks. This is I believe, the fourth session in the series. We've got one more coming up in a couple weeks from now. And really, it's been intended to focus on how do we create more agility? How do we deal with some of the lessons learned from the pandemic and the COVID period and the like, and give us more flexibility and adaptability in our supply chain? And this session is kind of part two of the sales and operations planning dimension of supply chain planning that we'll be focusing on. Just from the standpoint of housekeeping, the webinar is being recorded. We have all of the audience in a listen-only mode for purposes of better audio quality for everyone. But we are interested in your questions. So as we go through the presentation, if there's things that you have questions about, please use the question feature on the Zoom control panel to ask those, and we'll cover those off at the end of the session. We are going to make available the recording of the webinar, as well as the presentation materials from today's session available to you so that you've got them for your reference. You can share those with other colleagues and the like, and hopefully make good use of them as you move forward with your own supply chain priorities. So let's go. We're going to spend a few minutes just kind of going back over what we covered in the first session around some of the market realities, what's going on within the supply chain space. We introduced this concept called demand-driven sales and operations planning in the prior session. I'm just going to kind of set the context about what does that really mean. And then we'll get into some of the how-tos, two concepts that are very foundational to demand-driven sales and operations planning is using effective techniques around variance analysis from a standpoint of how have we been performing. The more we understand that, the more we can see issues that we may have been experiencing, the more we can learn and configure more flexibility and agility into the way we operate. So, learning the lessons of the past is, if you will, the variance analysis. And I'll show you some illustrations within the software, the Intuiflow software, to help bring some of that to light, especially in the Power BI arena, where we've got some great tools and insights that allow you to get good visibility to that and can learn from that. Things that you will want to do to configure your model in a better way. And model configuration from a DDS&OP standpoint is really at the core of it all. If we build the way we operate, our operating model, if you will, to have more agility and resilience, then we can become more demand-driven. We can pace our supply planning, our production scheduling, and the like to a greater and greater degree to what actual demand is in the market. And ideally, if we could respond to any order that came in on a given day, we would have kind of the ultimate agility and flexibility in the market that we're serving. So any movements we can make in that direction are going to be valuable for us. And this variance analysis and model configuration are kind of the two sides of that coin of how do we actually get that done. If we have confidence that we can take the right kind of corrective actions, then I think we can have confidence that we will become more agile, more resilient over time. So we'll summarize at the end, and obviously we'll take any questions and answers. And not to belabor this point, I use this chart a lot, but it's been a tough go. Supply chain has been a difficult area, but when you think about it, the fact that manufacturers in the US, and this is based on data from the US Federal Reserve, are turning inventory over at the same rate they were 25 years ago, in spite of spending a lot of money on better software during that horizon. I was up at an investor conference over the past couple of days, and we're sharing this story with them, and it's kind of a bit of an eye opener when you realize that, yeah, not like SAP's only job was to make my inventory turn faster, but given all that investment, we should expect to see better results, and we're not. And part of that is because some things have changed. The markets have become more competitive. There's a bit higher dependence on offshoring and things like that. But by and large, everyone feels like, yeah, we didn't really get the kind of benefits that we were expecting for. And our goal at DD Tech is to kind of change that trajectory for you. Not only that, but we've obviously learned a lot about these VUCA conditions, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We know this is all over the place. It comes from our bad forecasts. It comes from labor dynamics and staffing dynamics that we're having in our plants and in our planning communities. Feels like we're always in a firefighting mode. We've got too many SKUs. We keep growing our stock list or item list while at the same time trying to reduce our planning staff headcount. Makes that even more and more challenging. People are trying to find workarounds and deal with all of that volatility that's out in the market. So we should try to get to a better place. And the real answer in all that seems to be quite the hot story in the market now is how can we become more agile and more resilient? So we went back, looked at the definitions of those two terms. If I'm agile, I can just readily and quickly move and adjust to whatever comes my way. I've got that quick and easy grace to us. And that flexibility. And resilience means that if we do have a shock in our system, a strike at the Long Beach port or something like that, that we have the ability to withstand and recover from those conditions. And I think that the most important part of all of this is that even in the name of what we do, supply chain planning, we have to embrace the idea that it is a fact that we will have an uncertain future. And the more comfortable we become with embracing the certainty of an uncertain future, the more able we will be to deal with whatever variations come our way. So we have to change our mindset from this one of, hey, I can preordain what we're going to sell, how we're going to supply it, and all these things, we're going to line everything up, to instead saying, boy, what are the horror stories or issues that were going to impact us or potentially could impact us? And how do we give ourselves more ability through agile responsiveness, resilient ways of working to be able to deal with those uncertainties in a better way? So embrace the certainty of an uncertain future, and a lot of things are going to get better from that. But it's a matter of now, how do you do that? That's one thing to say it, it's another thing to go do it. Last time, in our last episode, we talked about the whole idea of conventional S&OP, which is we're going to build a consensus demand plan. We're going to all agree what that demand is going to be, and then we'll build a consensus supply plan, and then we'll take it to executives for approval. And in the long and short of it is we're going to find out that all that effort we went into oftentimes goes to waste because things happen differently in the market than what we were expecting, and we're left flat-footed and unable to respond quickly. So demand-driven S&OP says, hey, we got to embrace that uncertainty. So how are we going to change the way we operate to be better and more agile and more resilient? So we go from trying to get to this consensus demand plan and consensus supply plan to instead looking at different scenarios and testing how flexible our operating model is, right? Build agility into our business, and then we will be in a better place. It's asking different questions fundamentally than what traditional S&OP was built around. If we have a range of assumptions, we can then test that agility. We can strive wherever possible to pace to the actual demand in the market, because by definition, if I can respond to whatever orders come in today, I am truly agile, and that's the end game that we should be working towards. Instead of having all the tightly coupled dependencies within a conventional planning environment, if we can learn to utilize decoupling points, we actually create breakwaters or breakwalls out in the ocean to dampen the waves of variation that impact our supply chain, our operations, and other factors like that. And if we can move to more of a, instead of celestial alignment, as I call it, on the traditional S&OP, where we got to get all the stars and planets aligned, if we can go instead to a exception management thought, then we can make this process lighter weight, but actually get more value from it, because we're going to focus on those things that are really going to be relevant and make sure we take corrective action. So this chart is really there to just be a reminder that we're trying to shift our thinking into something that's actually more agile and more flexible in the way it's conceived. And if we can move in this direction, we will gain leverage out in our supply chain environment. The Demand-Driven Institute published something called the Demand-Driven Adaptive Enterprise Model. We think this is a great framework to be thinking about this topic for today. On the right side of the chart, we can think in terms of the longer range evolution of any given company. Every company is going to evolve to some degree, and you have to have a forward-looking view. They call it market-driven innovation, market-driven response, whatever you want to call it. It's about how will we evolve as a company to compete in the space that we want to be in. Are there longer range decisions that we need to be making? We clearly need to estimate and forecast what those possibilities might be. And so we're going to try to do that. And adaptive S&OP is really thinking big brain topics like, do we need to enter a market, perhaps in Europe or Asia, or do we need new plants, or do we need different distribution model, and things that will take us perhaps 18 to 24 months to implement. At the other side, a demand-driven company is really going to say, to the greatest degree possible, we want to pace our use of production resources and our use of our materials to the real demand that's in the market, not just a forecast, but the actual orders that are coming in. If I can take orders in and ship the same day or within 24 hours, I've gained an advantage of having the actual real demand be the primary driving signal that my business is responding to. And if we're using our production resources and materials in a proper way, then we're going to get to a better result. And that's going to involve concepts like time and capacity buffers and stock buffers as part of what's called the demand-driven operating model. How do we use our production resources? How do we plan our materials? The link between these two ends of the spectrum is a concept called demand-driven S&OP, where we're going to take these longer range forecasts of where we're going, projections of what we need to do, and tie it into the tactical and execution phase of how we operate today. So as an example, there may be promotional campaigns coming our way. There may be seasonal events. There may be a new sales channel that's coming online that's going to boost our revenues and our sales volumes substantially, that we need to plan for and ensure that we've got the ability to support as we execute going through that time horizon. And so today's topic is really about how do we take this demand-driven S&OP concept and build that agility and resilience into our actual operating model so that we're in this more agile and responsive kind of a position. The way that DDI teach this is they talk a lot about the relevant range, meaning if you're focused on tuning your model, don't do it based on estimates at 78 weeks out into the future, because more likely than not, that's well beyond your lead time, your tactical horizon. Yes, those things will eventually become part of the frame that you need to worry about, but you're not going to tune your operating model to that just today. You want to stay within a relevant range where it's useful and valuable from the standpoint of what they're calling a tactical future. Adaptive S&OP is that longer range horizon. That's really not the topic for today's discussion. We're going to concentrate on how can we work in this frame to build more and more resilience and agility into our operating model. There are lessons to be learned from the past. How did we perform over the previous quarter? Where were there opportunities for improvement, either in inventory utilization, stock out performance, the way we utilize production capacity, things like that. And then how do we take those and what we estimate our future to be to really further configure this operating model to bring it to light. If we're doing that in the proper range, then we will focus our energy and efforts on where we can get the most value from it. We're going to leave that other work for another day, because by and large, over time, that picture is going to change anyway. So let's not get too concerned about it right now. There's two major pieces of activity in this. Variance analysis is that bit of learning from the past. And we're going to go through some reports within the application and other views that help us understand how did our operating model perform. From that and through the S&OP process, which also includes inputs from the future, what we expect is going to happen, we can make then adjustments to our model. Perhaps we need to add capacity, perhaps another shift or something like that, or a half shift to give us more flexibility to be more responsive. Perhaps we've had too much inventory because our planners have planned above what the real guidance is from the software and the like. Perhaps there's other things that have happened that we can learn from. In this cycle of reconciliation, as they call it, is what we really want to focus on in our webinar today. What can we learn to make this operating model more resilient and agile based on what our past performance has been, right? As well as what we think may happen in the future without going and arbitrarily fixing a plan to that future, which we know is going to have some variance in it as we go forward. Last session, we talked about where those opportunities might be, and that there's 3 buffer types that we think about within the demand-driven landscape. One is stock buffers, commitments to hold inventory of a given item or sets of items. And we can see it in terms of where we are and where they have performed within their buffer parameters. You'll see a range chart here shortly that'll show, hey, we should have stayed within these guardrails. If we do that well, then that's a good indication that our system is in control. If we vary from that, then obviously there's opportunities for improvement. It can be on the side of excess capacity or excess inventory. These items that are high in the buffer would represent opportunities to reduce working capital commitments, save some money, and get into more alignment to the actual market. Whereas items that are deeply penetrated or have had historically performance in that arena, maybe we want to build up those buffers, give us more elbow room to deal with the variation that they're experiencing. And by protecting that, then we protect our service levels. We have constant availability. We are doing, again, a corrective action to bring ourselves into better alignment. And if we can kind of hover in that target range, that's the ideal. We have buffers that are well set up. We can get to the point where we can trust them to deliver the right kind of recommendations from an order management standpoint, and maybe go to auto planning so that the users can focus on other things that need more human intervention. On the production side, we can learn from the past as well and from our relative position. Capacity buffers relate to resources that we want to have enough extra capacity in, so that if there are points of variation, a machine breakdown in the routing or labor issues where we've got short on staff and we've got to work around some of that, we want to be in a position to be able to catch up. If we have capacity, size with capacity buffers, that is, then if there is variation, we've got the ability to make up for lost time and to not let that issue that caused that shortfall transfer further down in the operation, down the routing steps and things like that. So capacity buffers are a good thing, even though finance thinks that you should keep every resource running all the time. If you do that, you are inevitably limiting your ability to absorb variation. And if we really want to become more agile and resilient, we have to get better at absorbing variation. Time buffers are there within the routing to help protect the schedules of the various resources. If we use judiciously those kind of time buffers, we can help make sure that our constraints are fully utilized. Time lost on the constraint is time lost to the entire system, so it's quite expensive when we have those resources go idle. And if we find that we are constantly too early in giving our materials arriving into the time buffer, then we're releasing too much material out onto the shop floor, and we can curtail that back, revisit our settings and our routings and our run rates and setup times, and really get that better dialed in. If we're on the right side of this and we're constantly late, then we either need to correct the run rates and setup times, or perhaps increase our buffer size to make sure that because of the volatility of those upstream processes, we've got the ability to react and adjust. We're working with a company in the electronics industry that has high yield issues and the like, and they have to be able to factor in that as they start this process, they're not going to always have 100% throughput in terms of what the planned production was and what the actual usable production was. So you have to think about these things in terms of how can we accommodate for those real life scenarios and give ourselves that greater ability and agility that we're looking for. Now, all of this is going to depend a lot on where you are on this horizon. Companies in the heavy make to stock arena are going to utilize more of the material planning oriented tactics to build their agility and resilience. Others that are on the left side of this graphic will have more of a make to order focus. It's about scheduling and execution optimization at that point, because there's very little in the way of common materials. And it's more about how well are we utilizing our production capacity in a wise way to get the kind of agility and resilience. So we're not trying to be one size fits all here. There's a range of different scenarios, and our goal is to help provide the tools that you can utilize then wherever you are on this map. And obviously a lot of companies are kind of all over this map, meaning they've got a lot of make to stock, they've got a lot of make to order, they've got, frankly, the challenge of prioritizing between those two worlds as well. And that can be quite difficult. So thinking about this then from a DDS&OP standpoint, how are we going to configure more agility into our operating model? Where are there the sources of variation and disruption in our environment, and how can we better combat those? My feeling has always been is that the better we can deal with variation, the better off we're going to be. It will be less firefighting, panic mode issues, and things like that. So the more we can dampen variation, or the more we can contain it, the better off we're going to be. What can we learn from our past performance, and where are there opportunities to use the different types of buffers, stock, time, and capacity buffers, to create that additional agility because we're managing variation in a better way. The range of potential conditions we might need to address is about maybe running a few different forecast scenarios and testing how agile our environment would be, because by doing that ahead of time, we're going to be in a better position to respond if and when those situations come along. And that's what this is all about in my mind, is stress testing the model. We're not going to illustrate that stress testing today, but we'll show you a lot of these other facilities. We've got a number of clients using twin environments where their data is shadowed across, and they can utilize that as a way of doing those stress tests. It's not really going to fit into the range of what we wanted to cover on the webinar today, but if you're interested in that, we can help out with that. That digital twin environment, I think, can be quite useful, because you can leave your production environment running as you've configured it, while you can use your twin as your sandbox to go out and test a range of different scenarios. So two major issues or areas of focus: variance analysis and then model configuration. Let's talk about variance analysis as the first point. Where are there necessary changes to our stock buffers? And I should say something here too, by the way. There's a new term out there, sales and operations execution, which is kind of how you operate. I think of that as kind of more in the paradigm of the demand-driven operating model. It's how we're operating today. And then there's sales and operations planning. Well, to me, that's one continuum. There's a lot of execution-oriented things that are going on every day. And then there's planning-oriented things that happen on maybe a monthly or a quarterly interval. So it's not like any of these are specifically S&OP. If I'm flying along and I can see that I've got buffer settings that could be adjusted and I can get those done, I'm going to do it. So don't think you have to wait to do DDS&OP. A lot of these things can be part of the normal daily activity you focus on, what would now be called maybe sales and operations execution. Have there been trends in our execution alerts? Where can we improve? What are the lessons? Do we have vendors whose performance hasn't been favorable? Do we have planners who are perhaps buying double to stay out of trouble? Can we see some things about that where perhaps we can make adjustments so that they've got more confidence in the system recommendations? Have we used our production capacity wisely? If not, what are the root cause issues? Let's drill down on those and find out where we can further improve and create that agility and resilience. So variance analysis is a key topic here. It's one that is often going to be influenced by data analysis and Power BI. So let's jump over to the software here. And what we're going to look at is a range of reports that we've got in the Intuiflow environment. And these are on our historical performance. So I mentioned a few minutes ago the idea of a run chart, and that's what this one on the upper right here is. What we're looking to see is our inventory trending within the target range. We don't want it to be too down below here, because then we're going to have the risk of stock out exposures. And we obviously don't want it too high, because then we're carrying excess working capital. In our buffered positions, we have a target inventory value. We can see over the past horizon that our current inventory has trended very closely to that. We've stayed largely in the green zone. So overall, we're in a good place. We can actually look at this now, and we can go and let's say we want to look at a given material type. We're in a bottling environment. Let's say we want to see how our 6-pack 2 liters have been performing. When we update these views, we can see how the different items have been performing. And so you can do drill downs and factors like that. We've been planning into the proper planning very well in this cohort. If we scroll down here, we'll see another chart, which is, I think, one very, very interesting, because clearly forecasting is out there. We want to see whether our daily usage value that we're using to size our buffers is in line with what our qualified demand value has been. The qualified demand is that actual demand that we're responding to. And you can see that in our case, there's been a good correlation. The purple line is the qualified demand. The black line is what the EDU value is. By and large, that demand on a weekly basis has been hovering right around what our expected daily usage value is. This is especially important if you've elected to use forecasted daily usage as your buffer setting. If you would see a wide variance here where your EDU value is higher than what your actual demand values were for a given period, that would give you an idea of how much forecast bias you've got. So again, we're looking for points of variation. At least in these cases, these items, we've been performing quite well. We changed to other settings. Oh, sorry. We can kind of get a better sense of how these are all playing out. So that's kind of the buffer trend. Are we staying in range? This health check says we're doing pretty good. If we go to the past period analysis, we're going to take a little bit different view of it here now. What we're looking at here is a report that looks at where did we have exposures. In this case, we've got some SKUs that during their historical performance had days of shortage. And you can see here that first one, Diet Lemon, had 11 days of stock out. If we then select that item, our report will show that, hey, something happened here. We can see our buffer zones were declining. If this one was on an FDU, perhaps the forecast was too short, but actual demand came in and caused us to see a stock out exposure nearer the end of the time horizon that we're looking at. We were doing pretty well, but we found ourselves in a weakening position. So we'd want to go drill down and understand what were the root cause issues of that. We can see that we had net flow below top of yellow at times, so we weren't planning correctly. You can see that happening down here. Why weren't we ordering sooner? That would have helped alleviate the stock position. There might have been some other factors that were influencing this situation. But the goal here is to make sure that we're learning, again, from that past performance as ways of building more flexibility into our model. This would result, based on whatever we discover in this, in some perhaps model configuration changes for that we would look at. And so shortage days, I think, is a key one. You can see other factors being influenced here, whether we've had items there where net flow was over top of green, where we saw performance against lead time that was varying and the like, items that had high demand, other factors. So a number of different drill downs and ways you can look at it. Again, filtering down to cohorts of given items, your given vendors. You've got all of the ability to look at this across a range of different factors or segments within your item population. The next view is kind of an interesting view that I think can be quite useful. And this is duration for planning. How many weeks or months were we in a given planning horizon? We're looking over the last 3 months, and we can see there's some items here that we were in the blue zone for extended periods of time. And this is obviously something we don't want to have happening. This would be indicative of a couple of things. One, perhaps a planner is overbuying. There may be good reasons for that, or it may be that they're just still too, not confident that the system's giving them the right recommendations. There could be that there was a shift away. We can go from being in the green zone into over top of green if an item's rate of consumption slows down, and that would be a signal that perhaps there's a discontinuance of that item coming that we need to deal with, and we need to factor that into how we're going to operate going forward. So quite a bit of insights that we can gain. There's a demand history graphic here that we can utilize to understand, and I don't know why these are not displaying right now, but it would show you our actual demand pulses, and we can utilize those to get a better understanding of the way we've performed. I'll also show you a historical demand simulation that we can do with your actual demand history to show you, had we planned differently, what our performance would have been. So with that, we'll go back to the presentation material. So variance analysis is about looking at how are we operating, what can we learn from those things that have happened in the past to improve and dial up the settings that we have in our operating model to become more effective. Again, we're not trying to align everything to a consensus demand plan, consensus supply plan. Instead, we're looking at where did we have errors and issues, how can we improve, because we're going to use that then to flow into what's called model configuration. What have we learned from those? Perhaps we had some planning oversight that we could have utilized. Perhaps we had buffer settings that were not correct and causing us to be too far down in the buffer zones. Our overall trends look good, but clearly there were some opportunities for improvement. Now we then factor in that, okay, we've got our forecast. We can expect to see, or a range of forecasts, we can expect to see some insights as to how will those events play out in the future. Do we have other exposures? And we'll show you this in our S&OP module, how we bring those to light. It may result in a range of buffer configuration changes. We may choose to make items that were buffered, non-buffered. We may choose to make items that were non-buffered, buffered. We may choose to alter some of the buffer settings, like the daily usage type, the red zone coverage that we've got, or settings around batch size, minimum order quantity, or order cycle, or a number of other parameters where we can more effectively tune those to give us that agility and resilience. And then as well on the capacity side, we need to see how we're looking in terms of the capacity footprint that we want to have out there. Do we need to change our shift schedules? Should we consider alternate routings where perhaps moving production from one line to another would give us a bit more flexibility? Is there some load balancing that we can do through those kind of insights that we can get better advantage of? So we'll go back over to the software again, and we'll go into the S&OP module. Now, first thing I want to do is just talk a little bit about this philosophy of exception management. It's my strong belief that too often we tend to boil the ocean and we don't get the value from all that energy and effort that goes into that. And much like the pilot in a commercial airliner, as I'm flying back from Boston yesterday, where in reality, he or she is not flying the plane that much, the system is doing the job for us. They're monitoring a dashboard of the radar, the weather radar, other air traffic, other indicators about how the plane is flying and things like that. And why can't we emulate more of that behavior to make it easier for our planners and our supply chain teams to focus on where are the exceptions? So as we project forward, one of the key things we want to see is where are those? And you'll see some alerting thresholds that we set down here. We would obviously want to know, and it would be critical if we ever saw a point where our projected inventories may go below zero, or if they're going to be below, say, 40% of the red zone safety settings that we've set, or maybe 60% of that, because though we're getting into that kind of skinny range where we may not feel comfortable with only having a day or two of supply on an item with a 2-week lead time. The promotion report is really about looking at the forecast. Are there periods where the weekly demand is going to be 2 times the average weekly demand, 3 times the average weekly demand, or 5 times? And while those may not all create projected inventory exposures, we may want to know about these because those promotional events may have other implications in terms of our production planning and the capacity requirements that we're going to need. And then our daily usage, a key figure in any buffer setting is its rate of usage. If we see major changes in trajectory, either up or down on the daily usage front, we would want to get a better visualization about that. On a similar venue, we look at this from the capacity standpoint. We have thresholds to set what are the alert signals that we want to see. Critical if we're over 120% of capacity in a given period, high if we're right at capacity, and maybe medium if we're reaching that kind of upper boundary in the 80 to 100% range. One thing we also want to do here is, and I should have shown this on both sides, is we want to limit that horizon we're looking at. We don't need to know about things 38 weeks out into the future if our tactical horizon is only 13. Those are likely to change before we get to that point in time. So we want to keep this threshold as short as possible without being too short. What does that really mean? Well, it really means you want to set it around your longest unbuffered lead time, plus perhaps another month of extra response time. So it's not going to be, if I got a 13-week operating horizon, maybe I'm going to set this threshold, 14, 17 weeks out into the future, because I know within that I would have enough reaction time to deal with a potential issue that may cause a problem. And you want to keep that as short as possible without letting it get too short, because it will reduce the number of alerts you need to look at. And again, we're trying to get our focus on what really matters and give us a lighter weight way of going about the S&OP process. So we're on a report here. We're going to pick the daily usage report. And this is looking at the change in trajectory on some items. Here we can see an item that had a very low forecasted rate of demand. Its EDU is set to 0. So this thing is growing dramatically, and it's going to show a critical chain. We can look at its buffer projection, and this is the module is looking out into the future based on the forecasted demand. This is a label product. So the forecasted demand is cascaded down from the end item, from our demand planning solution, through the end item, down its fill material to the label requirements. Even though we see a critical flag here, because you can see the rate of daily usage is growing dramatically, this item is actually using average daily usage, and it had no usage in the past. So perhaps this is a new item. Actually, this is an updated label. It's got the revision, and that's why it had no historical usage. We see this kind of a projection graph. We've got a lot of inventory. We went out and bought a initial stock of this, so we're in plenty good shape, and we're going to be okay. But you can see we actually do have potentially some inventory exposures. Perhaps we might want to shift this one to an FDU setting, and that would allow us to make sure that we have some protection against that. Another item we can look at is this next one down, where it's running on a forward rate of usage, as you'll see here. It's really not that big of a difference, but it is growing. Oh, this one is actually on ADU, sorry for that. It's running at about 1,000 units per day, and it's going to be growing to a 1,500 unit per day kind of threshold. And you can see what is happening is that it's putting pressure on our buffer position. We're starting to get pretty low as that incremental demand is starting to ramp up. And this is where we can go to our part simulator. And what we can do here is we'll take that item, it was 150,972, it's this guy right here, and we can rerun that simulation. We'll see the same result that you just saw in that buffer projection. But now we have a chance to think about what would we do as a model configuration. These are those changes that we're making to give us more agility and resilience. In this case, let's say we want to change it to a blended rate of usage. It's not a huge change in its rate of demand, but let's try the blended setting and see if we get to a better place. And you can see now our days, minimum days on hand went up from 1.9, I think it was, to 2.2. Right here, we can then try an FDU setting and see if that gives us better leverage. And actually, out in our horizon, it gives us a lower threshold because it's overreacting now to a slowdown in demand that's going to happen after this promotional period. So in this case, I would opt for a blended setting. And this would give us a better way of managing the item. We're still going to have a little bit of a skinny zone here. We're 2.5 days or 2.2 days, but that seems manageable. You can see that the buffer is trending well. We've got 100% service. Our average inventory values are running in a good place, and we can use this. This simulation capability can extend to historical demands. Let's go and turn it to rerun what our historical demand has been, and we can see how the buffer would have performed historically. You can see it's had declining rate of demand over time. That forecast may be indicative of a turnaround in the season. During the simulation window, we are running at 99% because we don't have forecasted demand out into the future. It looks like we're going to trail off here. We're on this blend setting. If we go back to historical, I think you'll see a different picture. This gives us the tools to see, really, really good buffer performance. Yeah, we're not perfect here. We could probably get a little bit better. but there's ways that we would be able to manage that. And if we saw that demand coming, we'd be in a better position. Again, the idea here is we're not going to go start committing supply out into the future. What we're using the S&OP process is to configure our model and get to a better place. Hopefully that illustration was useful for you. The next thing we wanted to look at is this concept of rough cut capacity plan. I'm going to close a couple of these windows. Now we're going to go to the RCCP view. What we're doing is we're taking actually the projected supply, and I'm going to go to this view, and we're going to pick a material type. We're going to look at the line 1 items, which are the 2-liter 6-packs, and we're going to see the production volumes for those items going forward. And these projections are the actual supply requirements that are driving the workload that is impacting our rough cut capacity planning. All of these buffers are projecting out into the future based on their different performance, their buffer parameters, their signaling resupply orders as required going out into the future as we go. So from an RCCP standpoint, that's where we're getting the load for line 1. These are the items running on line 1, and we can see graphically that this one has a lot of peaks and valleys in it. There's a fair bit of variability in the demand for the products running across this, and it kind of begs the question, what could we do to get to a better place? We look at our loading across this, our average loading is around 119% over the horizon. The peak load gets up to 190. But let's say we wanted to kind of deal with most of that, and knowing that if need be, we want to, we could run extra shifts, or we could run a pre-build campaign to build up some of the stocks for perhaps a promotional event that's out there. So in this case, what we might want to consider is evaluating a change to our resource environment. Let's go to the resource editor. And this again would be a model configuration change where we're going to change line 1 from being using our standard 40-hour-a-week calendar to a longer calendar. And we'll go ahead and edit this, and we'll shift it to instead of an 8-hour-a-day calendar, we're going to change it to a 12-hour shift calendar, and we'll go ahead and put that in place. When we come back, then we can rerun the sorry about that. My Zoom thing is getting in my way here. We can rerun our RCCP and evaluate whether that gained us any advantage. So we'll go ahead and run that. And we'll come back to the RCCP view here. Now remember, what we did was we changed to 120%. Well, no, we added 50% to our capacity. We went from 8 hours a day to 12 hours a day. And you can see line 1's picture now looks better. We've still got a peak load out there of, you know, out in the future of a pretty heavy period way out in January. We're not really too concerned about that. If we look at our load graph, you can see that we're in a much better position. We've got some troughs here. That's okay. If we want to run a heavier run that week, we can do that. I think we illustrated that if you were on our food and beverage webinar some weeks ago, that you've got load optimization functionality in the workbench that allows you during the execution phase to make some adjustments to take advantage of a capacity footprint that you've got there. You would also obviously have the opportunity to think about if these products can run on line 2, maybe we can take some of the mix over to that line. You got, you know, you're just trying to illustrate here are some of the ways that we can adjust our model. So a lot of good functionality on that side. One of the other areas that we would want to be dealing with from an S&OP standpoint is our supplier collaboration. And one of the things that we want to be able to do is be able to review what our supply requirements are. So I'm going to go to the projected supply requirements, and I'm going to go ahead and filter down to a given vendor. Let's say I want to look at how we're doing with our concentrate supplies. And so we're going to go to the concentrator company. And these are the supplies of all the concentrates. You can see in the grid here, a weekly projection of what our supply requirements would be. We're also showing the inventory values, but these supply requirements would be what we would expect to need from them over the forward-looking horizon. Quite useful. I could do that for labels, my preforms, my other stock materials. And so part of how we protect for creating more agility is we make sure we collaborate well with our suppliers. The more agility we can help them create, the more we can work in harmony with our vendors, the better position we're going to be in. Those supply requirements are here. That was a projected inventory view. This is just the supply view. Gives you the same kind of visibility and allows us to take those out into the future. The other S&OP reports are, if you are running a constrained plan, you can do that. It will give you a constrained master production schedule view of what your stock buildup would be. This is doing it in an unconstrained manner, so we've got quite a bit of inventory. Clearly, with some of the pressure that we saw on line 1 there, we would have some issues with potential stockouts if we don't implement the shift changes that we talked about. Here you can see our forward-looking view of our run chart. Again, that's the corollary to the historical view of that. If we want to look at the different items in our portfolio, we can see those. I needed to refresh my reports, and that's why they're not popping up right now. Apologies for that. But those are the kind of functionalities that we can bring for you. Right, come up if we refresh here. Visibility is what I think is key to making us more and more viable from an S&OP standpoint, with using it as a way of creating agility. Let's try again here. All right, so you can see that here's our inventory trend. The blue line represents the forecasted demand by week. You can see our supply constrained and unconstrained is the same because we haven't brought RCCP into a constrained paradigm. And then you can see your inventory projection over time there. So quite a bit of visibility, again, intending to utilize these as tools to create that agility and flexibility that we're after. So we'll go back to the presentation material. Again, the idea here is we want to look at how can we, from a tactical review standpoint, learn from the lessons of the past, take note of those, build in the changes from a variance analysis to how we're going to configure our model, and utilize that model configuration process to get to a better place. Get to where the operating model itself is more agile and nimble. That reduces our dependence on forecast accuracy, improves our service levels, improves our working capital levels, and probably more than anything, makes life a bit easier for our planning staff, because we've already assumed that there's going to be that variation that we're trying to deal with, and we're prepared for it, instead of it catching us by surprise, and now we're right back in the firefighting mode that none of us want to be in. So it's a little bit of a wrap up. We're trying to get the configuration changes. We didn't spend time on the demand planning module. We're going to run a set of webinars around that in the coming weeks, so you'll have a chance to see that. We can get sales, revenue, profit projections out of that. We can get, obviously, our supplier projections and their requirements. We know what the working capital requirements may be by location, by product family. We've got a great facility here to test our rough cut capacity plan and anticipate the kind of changes that we may need for peak season buildup, or for other events that we may need to work around, like line shutdowns and maintenance periods and whatnot. We can get a better understanding of our workforce requirements as well, and use that to have a more harmonious relationship with our staff as we look at planning their schedules going out into the future. And obviously, too, part of this agility agenda gives us a better understanding of where our risk is, what the exposures are, and how do we become more resilient going forward. DDS&OP prioritizes management focus, right, on building that agility. Let's not boil the ocean. Let's not do celestial alignment. Let's focus on the things that can really make a difference for us, and work on building that agility instead of trying to be aligned to a very, very uncertain future. Range estimates through the use of a digital twin environment where you can test different scenarios, give the ability to get a better understanding of what your operating model can really stand up to. That exception-oriented approach that I've been harping about really does reduce workload and effort, gives us the ability to focus on what's most critical. And I think prioritization in difficult times like we've been through is really what we care the most about. We are reducing our dependence on a flawed signal. We all know that our forecasts aren't going to be perfect. And if we can insulate ourselves from that variation, then we're going to be in a better position as well. Companies that have started down this path are feeling more confident about the way they're managing S&OP. There's still work to be done. I'm not diminishing that it doesn't take effort and focus, but I think you can see that it's a different way of thinking about how we can get to the right answer. And certainly I absolutely believe it can reduce the level of effort while giving us better results. In terms of our agility series, we've got one more event on the horizon, and that is our production scheduling and execution. That's kind of more on that make to order side of the fence, but there's certainly things that we can do with our production environment, again, with time and capacity buffers to give us more flexibility and get you all to a better place. So with that, I'm going to stop the presentation. If you want to learn more about the demand-driven adaptive enterprise and DDS&OP, there's a lot of great content out there through the Demand-Driven Institute, and I encourage you to reach out to them. So with that, I'll stop and see if we have any questions.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, what is the best way to start implementing S&OP?
That's a pretty wide-ranging discussion. I'd say probably the most important thing to do, if I can answer the best way in this fashion, would be to know what you're trying to accomplish, right? What is the goal of our S&OP process? Whether you call it demand-driven or not, I really don't care. Is it to try to get a consensus plan built, or is it to try to build agility in? And I think it's really important because S&OP is a cross-functional process by definition. And you want your stakeholders to be aligned on what is it we're trying to accomplish. If you can get buy-in that, hey, we want to create better agility, I think your sales guys would be appreciative of that, because more likely than not, you're going to be able to help them when a big rush order comes in that you weren't otherwise expecting. If that agility means that you may need to squeeze in a little more capacity here and there, your finance guys may not be on board, but if they understand why it's so strategically valuable, maybe they're going to be in a better place on that. Obviously, from a supply planning and operations planning, if you understand, hey, if we do these things, we're going to be a lot more nimble, then I feel like the team is going to get to a better place. So I think the best way to start is to be unified on what is the goal. The goal here should be building agility and resilience. If we're going to focus that way, we're going to think about how we run the S&OP process differently than if we're thinking in the more traditional kind of celestial alignment manner that I kind of tease about. So hopefully that answer works for whoever asked that question.
All right, we got a question come in. You showed some neat reports to review. Are those native within the tool or out of the box?
Those are native within the solution. Those are through our Power BI platform. That is, I think, quite extensive. We've really gotten quite a bit of great feedback from our existing client base about that range of functionality that we've added. Power BI became part of the platform about 5-6 months ago now, and it's really taken off. Quite useful. So that's in the solution. There's a number of other analytic views already built within that, like the analytics trend report that's in the workbench and other facilities like that. But that Power BI stuff is in the platform.
All right, another question came in, a multi-part question for you, Erik. For the supplier forecast, are the raw materials forecast derived from the top level forecast? How does this cascade through simulation? Would be good to understand how this flow in Intuiflow.
Sure. So the demand of the parent items creates the demand for the raw materials, right? Now, what the projected supply requirements will be are going to be dependent on the inventory position and the existing open supply that item may already have. That forecasted demand is going to get backward scheduled, kind of like the normal way MRP would, into the earlier time horizons. If we're sitting on a lot of inventory, the first thing it's going to do is start to consume that inventory in the forward-looking simulation. If we're short on inventory, it's going to show potential stock out exposures. Maybe we'll need to expedite and things like that. But it's through that cascade that we get down to those lower level requirements. Repeat, did I answer the full question, Kevin, or was there more to it than that?
The second part of the question was, how does this cascade through the simulation?
Yeah, it's done as I expressed, forecasted demand the demand of the parent items, the forecasted demand creates supply orders for them, which then creates the demand for the components. And so that cascade is how that works down within that. Mhm.
Okay, another question. We have needed excess storage space at times. Is there a way to project space requirements in Intuiflow?
Absolutely. So we have a packaging unit of measure conversion tables, a packaging table we call it, where you can take items from eaches into pallets, containers, things like that. Most people do pallet planning. Coca-Cola has used our S&OP module over in Africa to project pallet positions because they have peak season buildup, and at times they've needed to use external warehouses to support some of that stock build that they do in advance of the holiday season at the end of the year. Yes, so pallet positions you can do. You can estimate space requirements. It's just a matter of putting those packaging dimensions into the software and then using the S&OP projections of inventory levels to convert into the space requirements.
Okay, and the last question we have is it possible to send supplier projected requirements from Intuiflow?
Yes. So I used a concentrate example in the illustration in the Power BI reports. Yes, that data is available. So some of our clients have taken the projected supply feed from the APM and sent it out in, like in automotive, for example, to the vendors because they need a forecasted schedule over a rolling 13-week horizon. The actual orders then align to that as they get to their frozen or their planning time fence and the like. But yeah, absolutely. Through EDI that can go out. You can do it through sending the projections. We've got the ability to create email cascades from those Power BI reports out to select vendors and things like that. Quite a bit of flexibility there. And I'm a real advocate for that because the more supplier collaboration like that you can build in, the better off your overall performance would be. Anything else?
That is all I see. And we are just at about time. Thank you, everyone.
Well, thanks everyone for your time and attention. Hope you found value in the solution. As you can see, I'm a big advocate for less is more. You know, the more we can tailor our activities to get the best leverage, that's good for the organization. I think this demand-driven approach to S&OP truly does give you a path to creating real agility and resilience. Conventional planning isn't going to get you there because it's all predicated on a more accurate forecast, and we all know what that story is like. So the idea of the webinar today is just give you an idea of some of the tools and techniques you can apply to creating that agility. We would love to help you on your own demand-driven journey. So if there's anything we can be doing to help out, please reach out. As we said, we're going to share the webinar link to the recording as well as the presentation materials. And with that, we'll say goodbye. Thanks to all for joining, and wish you all a great day. Thanks, everyone.